Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're looking for some stories to help you relax, ease your mind, or just drift off to sleep, you're in exactly the right place. Tonight, I've got some stories about betrayal, family drama, and people who showed their true colors when it mattered most. These are the kinds of stories that'll make you feel all sorts of emotions, but hopefully they'll also help you forget about whatever's been weighing on your mind. Before we dive in, just get comfortable, grab whatever helps you relax, and let's explore some stories that are honestly hard to believe actually happened to real people. So let's get started. Our first story tonight is one that cuts deep. It's about the ultimate betrayal from someone you're supposed to trust, unconditionally. My sister stole my fiancé, and now my family expects me to be her maid of honor. I don't even know where to begin with this story, because every time I think about it, I feel like I'm living in some kind of nightmare that I can't wake up from. My younger sister, the person I grew up with, protected and loved unconditionally, stole my fiancé of 3 years. And now, 18 months later, they're engaged, and my parents are pressuring me to be her maid of honor because family is family. Let me start from the beginning so you can understand just how deep this betrayal goes. My sister Megan is 2 years younger than me. Growing up, we were incredibly close. I was the protective older sister who helped her with homework, stood up to bullies for her, and was always there when she needed advice or support. When we became adults, that closeness continued. We'd talk on the phone multiple times a week, go on sister trips together, and I genuinely considered her my best friend. I met Ryan when I was 25 years old. We were introduced through mutual friends at a party, and there was an instant connection. He was everything I'd been looking for: smart, funny, ambitious, kind. We started dating and quickly became serious. By our 1-year anniversary, we'd moved in together. By our 2-year anniversary, we were talking about marriage. And just after our 3-year anniversary, Ryan proposed with a beautiful ring and a heartfelt speech about spending the rest of his life with me. I was over the moon. I immediately called Megan to share the news, and she seemed thrilled for me. She came over that same night to see the ring and celebrate with champagne. She hugged me and told me she couldn't wait to help me plan the wedding. She asked if she could be my maid of honor, and of course I said yes. She was my sister and my best friend. Who else would I choose? The wedding planning began, and Megan was heavily involved. She'd come over regularly to help me look at venues, dresses, flowers, all of it. Ryan was patient with all the wedding talk and would sometimes join our planning sessions. Looking back, I should have noticed something was off during those times, but I was too blinded by happiness to see what was right in front of me. About 4 months into the engagement, I started noticing small changes in Ryan's behavior. He was more distant, spending more time on his phone, and would sometimes step out of the room to take calls. When I asked about it, he'd say it was work stuff. I believed him because why wouldn't I? He'd never given me a reason not to trust him. At the same time, Megan started being less available. She'd cancel our plans last minute, saying something had come up. She was vaguer about what she was doing with her time. When we did hang out, she seemed distracted and would check her phone constantly. I asked her if everything was okay, and she said she was just stressed with work. Again, I had no reason not to believe her. The truth came out about 6 months into the engagement. I came home early from work one day because I wasn't feeling well. When I walked into my apartment, I heard voices coming from the bedroom. I thought maybe Ryan had the TV on, but as I got closer, I realized it was a conversation, and then I heard my sister's laugh. I pushed open the bedroom door and found Ryan and Megan in bed together. They weren't just talking or hanging out innocently. They were clearly in the middle of something intimate. My fiancé and my sister, in my bed, in my apartment, while I was supposed to be at work. I don't remember exactly what happened in the next few minutes. I remember screaming. I remember Megan crying and trying to explain. I remember Ryan standing there looking guilty, but also somehow annoyed that they'd been caught. I remember throwing things and telling them both to get out of my apartment. The whole thing felt like an out-of-body experience, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. After they left, I collapsed on the floor and cried for hours. I couldn't process what had happened. My fiancé, the man I'd planned to spend my life with, had been sleeping with my sister. My sister, the person I'd trusted more than almost anyone, had been betraying me for God knows how long, while helping me plan my wedding to the man she was sleeping with behind my back. In the days that followed, I learned more details that made everything worse. Megan and Ryan had been seeing each other for almost 3 months. It had started during one of our wedding planning sessions, when I'd stepped out to take a work call. They had exchanged numbers and started texting, then meeting up secretly. Megan would come to help me plan, and then meet up with Ryan later that same day. The depth of the deception was staggering. I confronted them both separately, hoping for some kind of explanation or remorse that would help me make sense of this. Ryan's explanation was that he and Megan had a connection that he couldn't ignore. He said he still cared about me, but that what he had with Megan was different, more intense. He actually said that he hoped I'd eventually understand and that we could all move past this, as if he'd just made a minor scheduling error and not destroyed my entire life. Megan's explanation was worse. She said she'd always had feelings for Ryan, but had suppressed them because he was with me. She said being around him during wedding planning had made those feelings impossible to ignore. She said she'd tried to fight it, but couldn't help herself. She cried and said she never meant to hurt me, that she loved me and hoped I could forgive her someday. She wanted me to believe this was some tragic love story where she was a victim of her own feelings, not a calculated betrayal that she'd participated in for months. I ended the engagement immediately and kicked Ryan out of the apartment. I told Megan I never wanted to see or speak to her again. I was devastated, humiliated, and angrier than I'd ever been in my life. I'd lost my future husband and my sister in one horrible moment, and neither of them seemed to fully grasp the magnitude of what they'd done. My parents' reaction made everything worse. When I told them what happened, they were initially shocked and sympathetic. My mom cried and said she couldn't believe Megan would do something like that. My dad said Ryan was dead to him. For a few weeks, they were fully on my side, and I felt supported. But then Megan went to them with her version of events. She told them about the connection and the undeniable feelings, and how she'd tried to resist, but couldn't. She painted herself as someone caught up in forces beyond her control, rather than someone who made deliberate choices to betray her sister for months, and my parents started to soften. First, it was Megan feels terrible about what happened. Then it was, she's still your sister, and you need to find a way to move forward. Then it was, you can't stay angry forever. It's not healthy. Within a few months, my parents were pushing me to reconcile with Megan and let go of the past. Meanwhile, Megan and Ryan stayed together. They posted pictures on social media, looking happy and in love. They moved in together into a new apartment. They started building a life together on the ashes of the life I was supposed to have. Every time I saw an update about them, it felt like being stabbed all over again. About a year after the discovery, my mom called me with news. Megan and Ryan were engaged. Ryan had proposed with a ring that looked suspiciously similar to the one he'd given me, which made me wonder if he'd just recycled it. My mom said she hoped this news would help me find closure and move on. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, but it got worse. Megan wanted me to be her maid of honor. She told my parents that having me stand beside her on her wedding day would prove that our family had healed and moved past the unfortunate situation. She said it would mean the world to her if I could support her marriage to the man she loved, the man she'd stolen from me. My mom actually tried to convince me to do it. She said that refusing would just prolong the family conflict and make everyone uncomfortable. She said that I'd had time to grieve and heal, and now it was time to be the bigger person. She said that Megan was my only sister, and I shouldn't let a man come between us, as if Megan wasn't the one who'd let Ryan come between us in the most literal way possible. I told my mom absolutely not. I said I wouldn't attend the wedding at all, let alone be in it. I said Megan had made her choice when she decided to sleep with my fiancé, and I was making mine by cutting her out of my life. I said that if being the bigger person meant standing next to my sister while she married the man I was supposed to marry, then I wasn't interested in being the bigger person. My mom cried and said I was tearing the family apart. I pointed out that Megan had torn the family apart when she slept with my fiancé for 3 months while helping me plan my wedding. Somehow, in my mother's mind, my refusal to pretend everything was fine was worse than what Megan had actually done. The mental gymnastics required to reach that conclusion are honestly impressive. My dad has been more understanding, but he's also not willing to take a firm stand. He's told me privately that he thinks what Megan did was wrong, and he doesn't blame me for not wanting a relationship with her. But he also won't stand up to my mom, or tell Megan that her request for me to be maid of honor is outrageous. He wants peace in the family more than he wants justice for his daughter. The wedding is in 3 months. I'm not going. I've made that clear to everyone, and the reactions have been mixed. My mom is furious and has told extended family members that I'm being stubborn and unforgiving. Some relatives have reached out to encourage me to reconcile with Megan for the family's sake. Others have quietly told me they support my decision and think Megan's behavior was unforgivable. Megan herself has sent me several messages over the past year and a half. She alternates between apologizing and making excuses, between asking for forgiveness and getting defensive about her choices. Her most recent message said that she understands why I'm hurt, but that she hopes I can eventually see that everything happens for a reason, and that she and Ryan were meant to be. She actually used those words, meant to be, as if destiny required her to betray her sister. I've been in therapy for the past year, trying to process everything. My therapist has helped me understand that my feelings are valid, that I don't owe anyone forgiveness on their timeline, and that choosing not to have a relationship with Megan is a reasonable response to what she did. She's also helped me work through the complicated grief of losing not just a fiancé, but also a sister, and in some ways, my parents' unconditional support. The hardest part isn't even Ryan anymore. I've accepted that he wasn't the person I thought he was, and honestly, I'm better off knowing that before I married him. If he could cheat on me with my sister during our engagement, he would have cheated on me eventually anyway. The person I really mourn is Megan, or rather, the sister I thought I had before I discovered who she really was. I keep thinking about all the moments during those 3 months when Megan chose to betray me. Every time she came over to help with wedding planning, she was sleeping with my fiancé. Every time she told me how excited she was for my wedding, she was lying to my face. Every time she hugged me and told me she loved me, she was hiding a devastating secret. Those weren't moments of weakness or accidents, they were sustained, deliberate deceptions. And now she wants me to be her maid of honor. She wants me to stand beside her while she marries the man I was supposed to marry, to smile for photos and give a speech about how happy I am for her. She wants to use my presence to legitimize what she did, to prove to everyone that it couldn't have been that bad if even the sister she betrayed is celebrating with her. I won't do it. I can't do it. Some betrayals are too big to forgive, and this is one of them. Megan made her choice when she decided that my fiancé was more important than our relationship. Now she has to live with the consequences of that choice, which include not having her sister at her wedding. My parents may never fully understand or support my position. I've accepted that our relationship will probably never be the same, but I refuse to pretend that what Megan did was okay, and I refuse to participate in her celebration with the man she stole from me. Some people might think I'm being petty or holding a grudge. I think I'm just protecting myself from people who've proven they don't have my best interests at heart. I'm slowly rebuilding my life without Megan in it. I have good friends who've supported me through this nightmare. I've started dating again cautiously, trying to trust people despite what happened. I'm focusing on my career and my own happiness rather than dwelling on what I lost. It's not easy, and some days are harder than others, but I'm moving forward, which is more than I can say for my family, who seem stuck on the idea that I should just get over it. Maybe someday I'll reach a point where I don't feel angry when I think about Megan and Ryan. Maybe someday I'll be able to hear their names without feeling that pit in my stomach. But that day isn't today, and it won't be the day of their wedding. They can have their celebration without me. I'll be somewhere else, living my life, and refusing to pretend that betrayal is something families should just sweep under the rug. That's the end of that story. So your sister slept with your fiancé for 3 months while actively helping you plan your wedding, got caught in your bed in your apartment, and now that she's engaged to him, she wants you to be her maid of honor, and your mom is pressuring you to do it for the sake of family harmony. The audacity of expecting you to celebrate the relationship that destroyed your engagement is genuinely unhinged. Megan didn't accidentally develop feelings. She deliberately chose to pursue your fiancé and deceive you for months while looking you in the eye and pretending to be excited about your wedding. That's not something you forgive and move past because time has passed. That's a fundamental betrayal that changes the relationship forever. You're absolutely right to skip her wedding, and anyone who thinks otherwise can attend on your behalf. Let's move on to a story about what happens when money brings out the worst in people. My siblings tried to have me declared mentally incompetent so they could control my inheritance. When my grandmother passed away and left me the majority of her estate, my siblings showed me exactly who they really were. They didn't just get angry or complain. They actually tried to have me declared mentally incompetent so they could take control of my inheritance. The legal battle that followed cost me years of stress and forever changed how I see my own family. Let me give you some background. I'm the youngest of 4 siblings. My older brothers, Marcus and and David, are 7 and 5 years older than me respectively. My sister Rachel is 3 years older. Growing up, I was always the odd one out in our family. I was quieter, more introverted, and had different interests than my siblings. They were athletic and popular. I was bookish and preferred my own company. I also had a special relationship with my grandmother on my mother's side. While my siblings found her old-fashioned and boring, I loved spending time with her. We'd have long conversations about books, history, and life. I'd visit her every weekend, even as an adult when my siblings barely made time for holiday visits. I helped her around the house, drove her to appointments, and genuinely enjoyed her company. My grandmother was financially comfortable. My grandfather had been successful in business, and after he passed, she'd lived modestly and let the money grow through investments. None of us knew exactly how much she had, but we knew it was substantial. She'd always said she'd take care of her grandchildren in her will, and we all assumed that meant an equal split between the 4 of us. 3 years ago, my grandmother was diagnosed with terminal cancer. I took a leave of absence from work to help care for her during her final months. I moved into her house, managed her medications, coordinated with her doctors, and made sure she was comfortable and loved during the hardest time of her life. My siblings visited occasionally, but the day-to-day care fell entirely on me. During those final months, my grandmother and I had many conversations about life, death, and what she wanted to leave behind. She told me she was proud of the person I'd become and grateful for the time I'd spent with her over the years. She said she'd watched me grow from a shy child into a kind, thoughtful adult, and she wanted to make sure I was taken care of after she was gone. I didn't think much of these conversations at the time. I wasn't caring for her because I expected anything in return. I was doing it because I loved her, and she needed help. The thought of her will or inheritance was the last thing on my mind while I was watching her decline and trying to make her comfortable. My grandmother passed peacefully in her sleep about 4 months after her diagnosis. I was devastated, but also relieved that her suffering was over. The funeral was difficult, and for a few days, my siblings and I were united in grief. But that unity didn't last long. The reading of the will happened about 2 weeks after the funeral. We all gathered at the lawyer's office, expecting to hear about an equal 4-way split. Instead, the lawyer read a will that left 60 of my grandmother's estate to me, with the remaining 40 split evenly among my 3 siblings. This meant I was receiving roughly $1.2 million, while each of my siblings received about $270,000. The room exploded. Marcus immediately started yelling that there had been a mistake. David accused me of manipulating our grandmother while she was sick. Rachel burst into tears and said it wasn't fair. The lawyer tried to explain that my grandmother had been very clear about her wishes and had updated her will 6 months before her death, well before she became seriously ill. My siblings refused to accept this. They demanded to see proof that our grandmother had been of sound mind when she made the will. They insisted that I must have pressured her, or even forged documents. They couldn't fathom that our grandmother might have simply wanted to leave more to the grandchild who'd been present in her life consistently for decades. The weeks after the will reading were chaos. My siblings united against me in a way they never had before. They called constantly, demanding I do the right thing, and split the inheritance equally. They said our grandmother would be ashamed of me for accepting the larger share. They said I'd clearly manipulated a dying woman, and they were going to prove it. When I refused to voluntarily redistribute the inheritance, my siblings took legal action. They contested the will, claiming our grandmother lacked mental capacity when she made changes. When that initial challenge was rejected based on her doctor's testimony that she'd been sharp until her final weeks, they took a different approach. Marcus, David, and Rachel filed a petition to have me declared mentally incompetent and to have a conservator appointed to manage my financial affairs. Their argument was that I had a history of mental instability that made me incapable of managing such a large inheritance responsibly. They wanted a court to put someone else in charge of my money, and they wanted that someone to be one of them. The basis for their claim was that I'd been diagnosed with depression and anxiety in my 20s and had briefly taken medication for it. They dug up old social media posts where I'd talked about struggling with mental health. They got statements from people claiming I'd seemed unstable at various points in my life. They painted a picture of me as someone who couldn't be trusted to make my own decisions. I was horrified. Having depression and anxiety doesn't make someone mentally incompetent. Millions of people manage these conditions while living completely normal, independent lives. My siblings were trying to weaponize my mental health history to steal my inheritance, and they were willing to publicly humiliate me to do it. I hired a lawyer immediately. She was furious on my behalf and said this kind of conservatorship abuse was unfortunately more common than people realized, especially when large inheritances were involved. She said we'd fight the petition aggressively and that we had an excellent chance of winning because there was no legitimate basis for declaring me incompetent. The legal battle that followed was one of the most stressful experiences of my life. I had to undergo psychological evaluations by multiple experts. I had to provide evidence of my ability to manage my own affairs, bank statements, work history, testimony from friends and colleagues. I had to sit in a courtroom while my own siblings argued that I was too mentally ill to be trusted with money. The psychological evaluations all came back confirming that I was mentally competent. The experts noted my history of depression and anxiety, but said these conditions were well managed and had no impact on my cognitive abilities or decision-making capacity. They said there was absolutely no basis for a conservatorship. My sibling's lawyer tried to argue that I might become incompetent in the future, and that the conservatorship was a preventive measure. The judge shut this down immediately, saying you can't strip someone's rights based on speculation about what might happen someday. He said the petition was clearly motivated by financial greed rather than genuine concern for my well-being. The petition was denied, and my siblings were ordered to pay my legal fees for filing what the judge called a frivolous and malicious claim. The inheritance was distributed according to my grandmother's wishes, and I received the share she'd intended for me. But winning the legal battle didn't undo the emotional damage. My siblings had tried to have me declared mentally incompetent. They'd used my mental health history against me in a public court proceeding. They'd argued that I was essentially too crazy to manage my own life. These were people who were supposed to love me, and they'd been willing to humiliate and disenfranchise me for money. I've cut off contact with all three siblings since the legal case ended. Marcus has never apologized, and still maintains that I manipulated our grandmother. David sent a half-hearted message saying he was sorry it came to this, but blamed me for not just splitting the money and avoiding the conflict. Rachel reached out once to say she missed me, but when I asked if she regretted trying to have me declared incompetent, she said she'd been doing what she thought was best for the family. My parents are still alive and have tried to stay neutral, which feels like a betrayal in itself. They've said they don't want to take sides between their children, but staying neutral when 3 of your children try to legally strip the rights of the 4th isn't neutral, it's enabling. They still see my siblings regularly and expect me to show up to family events and pretend nothing happened. I don't attend family events anymore. I can't sit across a table from people who tried to have me declared mentally incompetent and act like we're a normal family. I can't pretend that what they did was just a disagreement about money. They attacked my fundamental rights as a person because they were greedy, and I won't forgive that. The inheritance has been both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it's provided financial security that's changed my life. I've paid off debt, bought a house, and invested for the future. On the other hand, it cost me my relationships with my siblings and revealed the ugly truth about how they see me. Sometimes I wonder if I'd be happier without the money, but with an intact family. But then I remind myself that my siblings showed me who they really are. The money just gave them the opportunity. My grandmother knew what she was doing when she wrote her will. She left me more because I'd been present in her life, because I'd cared for her when she needed it, and because she wanted to acknowledge that relationship. My siblings see this as unfair because they think inheritance should be equal regardless of behavior. But my grandmother didn't owe them anything, and she had every right to distribute her assets however she wanted. I think about my grandmother often, and wish she could know how much her gift has meant to me. I also wish she could know what my siblings did, though I think she might have suspected something like this could happen. She once told me during her final months that money brings out people's true nature, and that I should be prepared for my siblings to disappoint me. I thought she was being pessimistic at the time. Now I realize she knew them better than I did. I've used some of the inheritance to fund a scholarship in my grandmother's name at the university she attended. I've donated to causes she cared about. I've tried to honor her memory in ways that reflect her values, rather than just spending money on myself. I hope she'd be proud of how I've handled it. As for my siblings, they'll have to live with what they did. They'll have to look in the mirror knowing they tried to have their own sister declared mentally incompetent out of greed. They'll have to explain to their children someday why Aunt Jennifer doesn't come to family gatherings. I hope they feel shame about it, but honestly, I doubt they do. People who are capable of doing what they did usually find ways to justify it to themselves. I'm building a new life and a new chosen family of friends who've been there for me through this ordeal. I'm in therapy working through the trauma of being betrayed by my siblings in such a fundamental way. I'm trying to focus on the good things my grandmother's gift has enabled rather than the ugly family conflict it exposed. Some days are easier than others, but I'm making progress. That's the end of that story. Your siblings tried to have you legally declared mentally incompetent so they could take control of your inheritance, using your history of depression and anxiety as their argument. They didn't just complain about the will or ask you to share, they actually went to court and tried to strip you of your fundamental rights as a person because you received more money than they did. And when they lost, not one of them genuinely apologized or acknowledged how horrific their actions were. Your grandmother left you more because you were actually present in her life, while they couldn't be bothered to visit more than a few times a year. They got $270,000 each and still tried to steal your share. The greed required to do that to your own sibling is genuinely disturbing. Our next story is about a living situation that went from bad to horrifying. My roommate was secretly filming me in our apartment and selling the videos online. I lived with a predator for 8 months without knowing it. My roommate, who I thought was a normal person and even considered a friend, had hidden cameras throughout our apartment and was selling footage of me to strangers on the internet. The violation I felt when I discovered what she'd been doing is something I'm still processing years later. I moved to a new city for a job about 3 years ago. I didn't know anyone there and couldn't afford to live alone, so I found a roommate through an online service. Her name was Brittany, and she seemed perfect on paper, similar age, similar profession, good reviews from previous roommates. We met for coffee before signing the lease, and she was friendly and easy to talk with. I felt lucky to have found such a compatible roommate. For the first few months, living with Brittany was great. We had similar schedules and cleanliness standards. We'd occasionally cook dinner together or watch movies in the living room. We weren't best friends, but we were friendly roommates who got along well. I felt comfortable in my own home, which is all you really want from a roommate situation. Looking back, there were small red flags I missed. Brittany was very particular about certain areas of the apartment and would get weird if I moved things around. She had a lot of electronic equipment in her room that she said was for her side business doing video editing. She was always home when I was home, which I attributed to similar schedules, but now realize was probably intentional. About 8 months after I moved in, I discovered the truth. I was doing some deep cleaning one weekend when I found a small camera hidden in a decorative item on a shelf in the living room. At first, I thought it was some kind of nanny cam that a previous tenant had left behind, but when I examined it, I saw it was connected and actively recording. My heart started racing. I searched the rest of the apartment and found 3 more cameras, one in the bathroom hidden in a toiletry container, one in my bedroom disguised as a phone charger, and one in the kitchen. All of them were positioned to capture me during private moments. The bathroom camera had a clear view of the shower. The bedroom camera was aimed at my bed. I was shaking and crying as the reality of what I'd found sank in. Someone had been watching me in the shower, getting dressed, sleeping, living my private life in what I thought was the safety of my own home. The violation was overwhelming. I felt sick to my stomach and couldn't stop trembling. My first instinct was to confront Brittany, but something told me to be strategic. Instead, I took photos of each camera and its location. I noted the brands and any serial numbers I could find. I didn't touch anything more than necessary because I knew this could be a crime scene. Then I called the police. The police came and documented everything. They took the cameras as evidence and asked me questions about Brittany and our living situation. They told me this was potentially a serious crime and that I should find somewhere else to stay until they could investigate further. I called a coworker who let me crash at her place while I figured out what to do. The investigation moved quickly. The police traced the cameras back to Brittany and discovered something even worse than I'd imagined. She hadn't just been recording me for her own purposes, she'd been selling the footage on websites that cater to voyeurs and people who get off on non-consensual recordings. There were videos of me showering, changing, sleeping, and just going about my daily life, all being sold to strangers who paid to violate my privacy. Brittany was arrested and charged with multiple felonies, including unlawful surveillance and distribution of intimate images without consent. When police searched her room, they found hard drives full of footage, not just of me, but of previous roommates as well. I wasn't her first victim. She'd apparently been doing this for years, moving from roommate to roommate and profiting from their violation. The legal process was traumatizing in its own way. Had to give statements and testimony about what I'd found and how it had affected me. I had to accept that strangers had seen me in my most private moments, and that those videos might still be circulating on the internet somewhere. I had to face Brittany in court and see the person who'd violated me so fundamentally show no real remorse for what she'd done. Brittany was convicted and sentenced to prison time, though not as much as I thought she deserved. Her lawyer argued that she had mental health issues and hadn't fully understood the harm she was causing. The judge was somewhat sympathetic to this argument, which infuriated me. She'd been doing this for years across multiple victims. She absolutely understood what she was doing and just didn't care. The aftermath has been difficult to navigate. I struggle with privacy and trust in ways I never did before. I check every new space for hidden cameras before I feel comfortable. I have trouble sleeping in unfamiliar places. I've had nightmares about being watched and about those videos being seen by people I know. Therapy has helped, but the scars from what Brittany did will probably never fully heal. I also had to deal with the practical fallout. I broke the lease and moved out of that apartment, which cost me money I didn't have. I had to find a new place to live, while traumatized and financially strained. I had to explain to friends and family what had happened, which meant reliving the violation over and over. Some people were supportive. Others seemed almost curious in a way that made me uncomfortable. The hardest part was accepting that those videos are probably still out there somewhere. The websites Brittany used were taken down, but videos can be copied and shared endlessly on the internet. Someone might be watching footage of me right now without my knowledge or consent. I'll never have full closure, because I'll never know the full extent of how my privacy was violated, or who has seen me at my most vulnerable. I've tried to take back some control by becoming an advocate for victims of this type of crime. I've spoken with lawmakers about strengthening penalties for non-consensual recording and distribution. I've connected with other survivors to share experiences and support each other. Turning my trauma into advocacy has been healing in some ways, though it also means I can never fully put what happened behind me. Brittany is out of prison now. She served less than 2 years for what she did to me and her other victims. She's required to register as a sex offender, but I still worry about her doing this to someone else someday. People like her don't usually stop just because they got caught once they just get more careful about not getting caught again. I'm more cautious about roommates now. When I eventually got another roommate, I still couldn't afford to live alone. I did extensive background checks and trusted my gut about any weird feelings. I also did regular sweeps of common areas for hidden cameras, which is sad but necessary given what I've experienced. My new roommate knows what happened to me and has been understanding about my need for vigilance. What Brittany did wasn't just a violation of my privacy, it was a violation of my sense of safety in the world. Home is supposed to be where you can relax, be yourself, and let your guard down. She took that from me and monetized it. She turned my private life into a product for strangers to consume. The dehumanization of that is hard to put into words. If you're looking for a roommate, please be careful. Do background checks. Trust your instincts if something feels off, and know what to look for in terms of hidden cameras. They can be disguised as everyday objects like phone chargers, smoke detectors, and decorative items. I never thought this would happen to me, and I'm sure Brittany's other victims felt the same way. Predators are good at seeming normal, which is what makes them so dangerous. That's the end of that story. That's the end of that story. Your roommate hid cameras throughout your apartment, including in the bathroom and your bedroom, recorded you for 8 months without your knowledge, and sold the footage to voyeur websites for profit. She violated your privacy in the most fundamental way possible and turned your private life into a product for strangers to consume. And she'd done this to previous roommates too. She was running an ongoing operation, exploiting the people who trusted her enough to share a living space. The fact that she only served less than 2 years in prison for this seems incredibly light given the lasting trauma she caused, and the fact that those videos are probably still circulating somewhere on the internet. She didn't just violate your privacy, she stole your sense of safety in your own home. Let's talk about someone who had to deal with a coworker who made their life miserable for years. My coworker bullied me for 3 years, and HR did nothing until I recorded everything. I spent 3 years being tormented by a coworker while HR looked the other way. She spread rumors about me, sabotaged my work, and made my job a living hell. It wasn't until I started secretly recording her behavior and documenting everything that I finally got justice, and even then, the company tried to protect her until the evidence was undeniable. I started working at this marketing firm about 5 years ago. It was my dream job, great company, interesting work, good salary. I was excited to build my career there and was determined to prove myself. For the first 6 months, everything was perfect. Then, Vanessa was hired, and my work life became a nightmare. Vanessa and I had the same job title and worked on the same team. From the beginning, she seemed to view me as competition rather than a colleague. She'd make snide comments about my work in meetings. She'd take credit for ideas I'd shared. She'd exclude me from team lunches and after-work gatherings. At first, I thought she was just insecure and trying to establish herself, so I tried to be friendly and give her the benefit of the doubt, but Vanessa's behavior only escalated. She started spreading rumors about me to other colleagues. She told people I was sleeping with our manager to get ahead. She said I'd lied on my resume and wasn't qualified for my position. She claimed I'd badmouthed various coworkers behind their backs. None of this was true, but the rumors spread, and suddenly people who'd been friendly with me were giving me the cold shoulder. I tried to address it directly with Vanessa. I asked her if I'd done something to offend her and said I wanted us to have a good working relationship. She smiled sweetly and said she had no idea what I was talking about. She said she thought we were getting along fine and that I must be misinterpreting things. It was textbook gaslighting, making me doubt my own perception of what was happening. The sabotage started about 6 months after Vanessa joined. I'd find that files I'd saved had been moved or deleted. I'd discover that emails I'd sent had been altered or that I'd been removed from important email chains. I'd show up to meetings that had been rescheduled without my knowledge. Projects I was working on would suddenly be reassigned to Vanessa with no explanation. I went to my manager about these issues, and he was sympathetic but ineffective. He said he'd look into it, but then nothing would change. He seemed unwilling to believe that Vanessa was deliberately sabotaging me, attributing the problems to technical glitches or miscommunication. I think he just didn't want to deal with the conflict. I went to HR next. I documented specific incidents and presented them with evidence of Vanessa's behavior. The HR representative took notes and said they'd investigate. A week later, she got back to me and said they'd talked to Vanessa, who'd denied everything. They said without witnesses or proof, it was my word against hers, and they couldn't take action. They suggested I try to work things out with Vanessa directly, which I'd already attempted without success. The situation continued to deteriorate. Vanessa became bolder, seeming to realize that no one was going to stop her. She'd make insulting comments about my appearance in front of others. She'd laugh at my ideas in meetings. She'd send passive-aggressive emails that were technically professional but clearly hostile. My mental health was suffering, and I dreaded going to work every day. About 2 years into this ordeal, I decided I needed to take matters into my own hands. I started documenting everything obsessively. I kept a detailed log of every incident, including dates, times, witnesses, and what was said or done. I saved every email and message that showed Vanessa's hostility, and I started secretly recording conversations with Vanessa when we were alone. I know recording someone without their knowledge is legally questionable, depending on where you live. In my state, it's legal as long as one party to the conversation consents, which I did. I wasn't planning to use the recordings unless absolutely necessary, but I wanted proof that I wasn't imagining things, and that Vanessa was as bad as I said she was. Over the next several months, I accumulated damning evidence. I had recordings of Vanessa calling me names, threatening to get me fired, and admitting to deleting my files. I had emails showing her taking credit for my work. I had testimonies from a couple of coworkers who'd witnessed her behavior and were willing to speak up. I had a pattern of documented incidents that showed clear and sustained harassment. I went back to HR with my comprehensive documentation. This time, I didn't just report verbal complaints, I presented them with a binder full of evidence and recordings. I told them this had been going on for nearly 3 years and that I'd tried to resolve it through proper channels multiple times. I said if they didn't take action, I'd be consulting with an employment lawyer about my options. HR finally took me seriously. They launched a formal investigation that included interviewing multiple coworkers and reviewing the evidence I'd provided. The recordings were particularly impactful. Hearing Vanessa's actual words made it impossible for anyone to claim I was exaggerating or misinterpreting things. The investigation confirmed everything I'd been saying for years. Vanessa had created a hostile work environment through sustained harassment, sabotage, and bullying. Multiple coworkers corroborated my experiences and shared their own concerns about her behavior. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Vanessa was terminated. I wasn't there when it happened, but I heard heard she was shocked and angry, insisting she'd done nothing wrong and that I'd somehow set her up. Even in the face of recordings of her own voice saying terrible things, she couldn't accept responsibility for her actions. Some people are truly incapable of self-reflection, but the story doesn't end there. I'd spent 3 years being tormented while the company did nothing. 3 years of my career had been affected by Vanessa's behavior, and the company's failure to protect me. Even though Vanessa was finally fired, I felt like the company had failed me repeatedly before finally taking action. I ended up leaving the company about 6 months after Vanessa was terminated. The environment had been poisoned for too long, and there were still coworkers who'd believed Vanessa's rumors and treated me differently because of them. My relationship with my manager was strained because I felt he should have done more to protect me. And honestly, I was just burned out from years of fighting to be taken seriously. I found a new job at a different company, where I've been much happier, but I still carry scars from those 3 years. I'm more guarded around coworkers and less trusting of HR departments. I document everything now as a matter of habit, even when there's no indication of problems. The experience taught me that workplace bullies can thrive when companies prioritize avoiding conflict over protecting employees. Vanessa, from what I've heard through mutual acquaintances, landed on her feet at another company. She probably told them she was let go unfairly and has probably started the cycle again with new victims. Workplace bullies rarely face lasting consequences because they're often good at managing up and hiding their true nature from people with power over them. My advice to anyone dealing with a workplace bully: document everything from the beginning. Don't trust that HR will help you without evidence. They often protect the company rather than the employee. Build relationships with coworkers who can corroborate your experiences, and know your legal rights, including whether you can record conversations in your jurisdiction. No one should have to spend 3 years being tormented at their job while the people responsible for stopping it look the other way. But that's the reality for many workers dealing with bullies. Companies talk about positive workplace culture, but when push comes to shove, they often choose the path of least resistance, which usually means ignoring the problem until it becomes undeniable. That's the end of that story. Your coworker spent 3 years spreading rumors, sabotaging your work, and making your job miserable, while HR did nothing because it was your word against hers. It took you secretly recording her admitting to deleting your files and calling you names before anyone would take action. 3 years of documented harassment, and they only moved when you showed up with recordings and threatened legal action. And even after she was fired, the company had let the environment get so toxic that you ended up having to leave anyway. She faced consequences eventually, but only after you did all the work of building an airtight case. The company failed you at every step until you made it impossible for them to keep failing you. Our next story is about discovering that everything you knew about your family was a lie. I found out at 30 that my dad isn't my biological father, and my whole family knew except me. 3 years ago, at 30 years old, I took a DNA test for fun and discovered that my father isn't my biological father. When I confronted my family, I learned that everyone, my parents, my siblings, my grandparents, my aunts and uncles, had known the truth my entire life. They'd all agreed to keep it secret from me, and they'd succeeded for 3 decades. It started innocently enough. Those ancestry DNA tests were popular, and I was curious about my heritage. My family had always told me I was mostly Italian and Irish on my dad's side and German on my mom's side. I thought it would be interesting to see the breakdown and maybe find some distant cousins I didn't know about. When the results came back, I was confused. The ethnic breakdown was completely different from what I expected. No Italian at all, and significant percentages from regions that didn't match either side of my family. But the really shocking part was the DNA relatives section. There was a man listed as a close match, possibly a half-sibling or uncle, with a name I didn't recognize. I assumed there was some mistake. Maybe the test was wrong, or maybe there was a secret adoption in my dad's family that no one had mentioned. I messaged the unknown relative to ask how we might be connected. His response changed everything. He said his father was a man named Robert Collins. He said his father had told him years ago about a brief affair in the early 1990s with a married woman, and that the woman had gotten pregnant. His father had offered to be involved, but the woman had refused and said she was going to raise the baby with her husband. The timing matched my birth exactly. I felt like the ground had dropped out from under me. I confronted my mom first. I showed her the DNA results and told her what the stranger had said. She went pale and started crying. She admitted that yes, she'd had an affair over 30 years ago, and yes, my biological father was not the man who raised me. She said she'd made a mistake and had decided the best thing for everyone was to keep it secret and raise me as my dad's child. I asked if my dad, the man I'd called dad for 30 years, knew the truth. She said yes, he'd known since before I was born. He'd agreed to raise me as his own and to never tell me the truth. They'd made a pact to take this secret to their graves, and if not for the DNA test, they would have succeeded. I was devastated and furious. I'd spent my entire life believing something that was fundamentally untrue. Every time my dad had called me his daughter, every time we joked about me having his nose or his temper, every time I'd traced my family tree for school projects, it was all based on a lie. When I confronted my dad, he was calm, but clearly uncomfortable. He said he'd always considered me his daughter, regardless of biology. He said he'd made a choice 30 years ago to raise me as his own, and he didn't regret it. He said he hoped I could understand that they'd done what they thought was best for me. But here's the part that really broke me. Everyone in my family had known. My older siblings had been told when they were teenagers. My grandparents on both sides had been informed. My aunts, uncles, and even some cousins knew the truth about my paternity. The entire family had maintained this lie for 30 years. Through every birthday, every holiday, every family gathering, they'd all looked at me knowing something about my own life that I didn't know. I asked my siblings why they'd never told me. My brother said our parents had made them promise to keep the secret, and they'd felt it wasn't their place to reveal it. My sister said she'd almost told me several times, but was afraid of the fallout. They both said they were sorry I found out this way, but they still defended our parents' decision to keep it secret. The family member I'd connected with through the DNA test turned out to be my half-brother Robert Collins' son from his marriage. He'd always known about me because his father had told him about the affair and the resulting pregnancy. He said his father, now in his 70s, would be open to meeting me if I was interested. I was torn about whether to pursue a relationship with my biological father. On one hand, I had questions only he could answer and curiosity about where I came from. On the other hand, meeting him felt like a betrayal of the man who'd raised me, even though he'd been lying to me my entire life. I eventually decided to meet Robert. It was awkward and emotional, but also strangely healing. He told me about the affair, about offering to be involved, about respecting my mother's decision to raise me with her husband. He showed me photos of his family, my biological half-siblings, my biological grandparents, a whole set of relatives I'd never known existed. I looked like Robert. We had the same eyes, the same chin, the same crooked smile. For the first time in my life, I saw myself reflected in someone's face, in a way I never had with the man I'd called Dad. It was validating and devastating at the same time. The fallout from my discovery has been extensive. My relationship with my parents is strained. I'm angry at them for lying to me for 30 years, and they're hurt that I can't just accept their explanation and move on. They keep saying they did what they thought was best, and I keep saying that deciding what's best for someone includes whether they get to know the truth about their own identity. My relationship with my siblings is complicated. I understand they were put in an impossible position as kids, but they continued keeping the secret as adults. They could have told me at any point over the past decade and chose not to. I'm working on forgiving them, but trust has been damaged. I've started building a relationship with Robert and my biological half-siblings. It's strange to have new family members at 30, especially ones who've always known about me when I didn't know about them, but they've been welcoming, and I'm grateful for that. The hardest part has been re-examining my entire childhood through this new lens. All those years of feeling somehow different from my siblings, of not quite fitting in, of wondering why I didn't look like anyone in my family. It wasn't my imagination. I was different, and everyone knew it except me. I've been in therapy processing all of this. My therapist has helped me understand that my feelings of betrayal are valid, that being lied to about your own identity for 30 years is a significant trauma, and that I don't have to forgive anyone on their timeline. She's also helped me see that my parents' decision, while wrong, came from a place of wanting to protect the family unit they'd built. I still don't know if I'll ever fully trust my family again. Something fundamental broke when I learned they'd all been keeping this secret. The family I thought I knew was, in some ways, a carefully constructed illusion. The real family, the one with secrets and lies and complicated motivations, is still revealing itself to me. What I've learned from this experience is that secrets have a way of coming out eventually. My parents thought they could keep this hidden forever, but DNA technology made that impossible. If you're keeping a secret like this from someone, please reconsider. The truth will likely emerge someday, and the betrayal of years of deception is worse than whatever difficult conversation you're trying to avoid. I'm still the same person I was before I took that DNA test, but I'm also fundamentally different. I have a different biological father, different genetic relatives, a different medical history. Finding out at 30 meant losing 30 years of relationships and self-understanding that could have been different if I'd known the truth. That's time I'll never get back. That's the end of that story. You found out at 30 years old that your dad isn't your biological father, and that literally everyone in your family, parents, siblings, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, had known for your entire life and kept it from you. 30 years of holidays, family gatherings, and intimate moments, and every single person there knew something fundamental about your identity that you didn't. Your parents decided you didn't deserve to know where you came from, and everyone else went along with it. They say they did what was best for you, but they took away your choice to know your own story and build a relationship with your biological father on your own terms. That's not protection, that's control. Let's move to a story about a family member who couldn't be trusted. My uncle scammed my elderly grandmother out of her life savings, and the family wants me to stay quiet. My uncle stole over $200,000 from my 85-year-old grandmother through a years-long financial manipulation scheme, and when I found out and wanted to report him, my family pressured me to stay silent to avoid scandal. They'd rather protect his reputation than get my grandmother justice or her money back. My grandmother is a sweet, trusting woman who worked her entire life as a nurse. She and my grandfather saved carefully, and when he passed away 15 years ago, she was left with a comfortable nest egg that was supposed to support her through her remaining years. She's always been generous with family, helping with college tuition and weddings, but she was smart about keeping enough for her own needs. My Uncle David is my mother's brother. He's always been the problem child of the family, failed businesses, multiple divorces, always seeming to need money for some new scheme or emergency. The family would help him out periodically, though there was always grumbling about his poor choices. I never paid much attention to him because he lived in a different state, and I only saw him at occasional family gatherings. About a year ago, I noticed that my grandmother seemed stressed about money in a way she never had before. She mentioned that her accounts were lower than expected and that she might need to cut back on some expenses. This was unusual because she'd always been financially secure. I offered to help her look at her accounts and figure out what was going on. What I found made me sick. Over the previous 5 years, large sums of money had been transferred out of my grandmother's accounts, $5,000 here, $10,000 there, occasionally larger amounts up to $50,000. The transfers went to an account I didn't recognize. When I totaled them up, over $200,000 was missing. I asked my grandmother about the transfers, trying not to alarm her. She was confused and said she didn't remember making those transfers. She said David had been helping her with her finances for the past few years because she was having trouble with online banking. She said David had set up automatic transfers to what he said was a high-yield savings account that would grow her money faster. There was no high-yield savings account. David had been transferring my grandmother's money to his own account for years, using her trust and cognitive decline to steal from her. He'd convinced her that he was helping her while systematically draining her life savings. I was furious and wanted to go to the police immediately. But first, I called my mother to tell her what I'd found. Her reaction shocked me. She already knew. She had found out about 6 months earlier and had confronted David, who'd promised to pay the money back over time. She'd decided not to involve the police because she didn't want to tear the family apart or put David in jail. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. David had stolen over $200,000 from their elderly mother, and my mother's response was to let him promise to pay it back. I asked how much he'd repaid in 6 months. The answer was nothing. He kept saying he was working on it, and she kept believing him. I told my mother I was going to the police regardless of her wishes. My grandmother was the victim of a crime, and David needed to face consequences. My mother begged me not to report him. She said it would destroy the family. She said Grandma wouldn't want to see her son in jail. She said we should handle this privately. The rest of the family echoed my mother's position. My aunts, my other uncles, my cousins, everyone said we should keep this quiet. They said involving the police would be embarrassing. They said David was family and we don't send family to prison. They said I was being vindictive and dramatic. Nobody seemed to care that David had stolen my grandmother's entire life savings. Nobody seemed concerned that she might now struggle financially in her final years because her son had robbed her. The only thing they cared about was protecting David from consequences and protecting the family reputation from scandal. I refused to stay quiet. I took my grandmother to the police station and helped her file a report. She was confused and sad about what David had done, but she also understood that it was wrong and that he needed to be held accountable. The police began an investigation. The family's reaction was immediate and hostile. My mother stopped speaking to me. Aunts and uncles called to yell at me for destroying the family. Cousins sent messages saying I'd gone too far and should have respected the family's wishes. I was treated like the villain for reporting a crime against an elderly woman. David was eventually arrested and charged with elder financial abuse and theft. The evidence was overwhelming financial records, transaction histories, my grandmother's testimony about David helping with her accounts. He tried to claim it was a loan or an investment on her behalf, but the pattern of deception was clear. During the legal proceedings, family members who'd told me to stay quiet testified on David's behalf. They talked about what a good person he was and how this was all a misunderstanding. They implied that my grandmother was confused and that I had pushed her into making accusations. They chose David's side over hers, even though he'd stolen her money. David was convicted and sentenced to prison time plus restitution. He'll be paying my grandmother back for years, though she'll probably never recover the full amount. Her financial security has been permanently damaged, and her final years will be more constrained because of what her own son did to her. The family has never forgiven me for going to the police. There are gatherings I'm not invited to, and relatives who won't acknowledge me. The narrative they've constructed is that I'm the one who caused the problem by involving law enforcement, not David, who actually stole the money. It's a stunning example of how families can enable and protect abusers, even when the evidence is undeniable. My grandmother is the only one who's thanked me. She said she's grateful someone was willing to stand up for her when everyone else wanted to sweep it under the rug. She's sad about David and sad about the family conflict, but she also understands that what he did was wrong and that he needed to face consequences. I've learned that family loyalty can become toxic when it means protecting criminals at the expense of victims. David wasn't entitled to escape accountability just because he shares DNA with the people he victimized. My grandmother wasn't obligated to suffer in silence to preserve family harmony, and I wasn't wrong to choose justice over silence, even though it cost me relationships. If you ever discover that a family member is being financially abused by another family member, please don't stay quiet. Elder financial abuse is devastatingly common, often committed by relatives who have access and opportunity. The victims deserve protection and justice, even if providing it creates family conflict. David is in prison now. My grandmother is safe and has people watching out for her finances. The family is fractured, but honestly, was it really intact if everyone was willing to overlook $200,000 being stolen from an elderly woman? Sometimes breaking a family's silence is the only moral choice, even when everyone else wants you to stay quiet. That's the end of that story. Your uncle stole over $200,000 from your 85-year-old grandmother over 5 years. And when you found out and wanted to report it, your entire family pressured you to stay silent to protect him and the family reputation. They knew he'd stolen her life savings, and their solution was to let him promise to pay it back, which he never did. They'd rather your grandmother spend her final years financially struggling than see your uncle face consequences for his crimes. And when you did the right thing and reported him, they treated you like the villain for destroying the family. He destroyed the family when he decided to rob his own mother. You just refused to be complicit in covering it up. Our next story is about someone whose ex couldn't accept that it was over. My ex-boyfriend showed up at my wedding and tried to stop the ceremony. I thought I'd finally escape my toxic ex-boyfriend when I moved on and got engaged to a wonderful man. But on my wedding day, my ex showed up uninvited and tried to stop the ceremony by claiming he had objections. The whole situation was humiliating and terrifying, and it's taken a long time to process what happened. Let me give you some background. I dated my ex, whose name was Tyler, for about 2 years in my mid-20s. The relationship was tumultuous from the start, lots of intense highs and devastating lows. Tyler was possessive and jealous, constantly accusing me of flirting with other men and demanding to know where I was at all times. I made excuses for his behavior because I thought he loved me and was just insecure. When I finally gathered the courage to leave Tyler, he didn't take it well. He begged, threatened, and eventually stalked me for several months after the breakup. He'd show up at my work, at my apartment, at places I frequented. I had to change my phone number, move to a new apartment, and eventually get a restraining order. After the restraining order was in place, he finally backed off, and I didn't hear from him for about 2 years. During those 2 years, I healed and moved on. I met my now husband Andrew at a friend's barbecue. He was kind, stable, and everything Tyler wasn't. Our relationship was healthy and drama-free, something I hadn't realized I'd been missing until I experienced it. When Andrew proposed, After 2 years of dating, I said yes without hesitation. I didn't invite Tyler to the wedding, obviously. I hadn't spoken to him in years, and the restraining order, while expired, made it clear he wasn't welcome in my life. I assumed he'd moved on too, and wouldn't even know I was getting married. I was wrong. Our wedding was at a beautiful garden venue. The ceremony was set up outdoors, with about 100 guests. Everything was perfect. The weather, the flowers, the music. I was walking down the aisle with my father, looking at Andrew's face, and feeling overwhelmed with happiness. Then, right as we reached the officiant and were about to begin, there was a commotion at the back of the venue. I turned around and saw Tyler pushing past guests, shouting that he needed to stop the wedding. My blood ran cold. He was here, at my wedding, after everything he'd put me through. Tyler got to the front of the aisle before anyone could stop him. He started ranting about how I belonged with him, how Andrew had stolen me away, how he couldn't let me make the biggest mistake of my life. He said he still loved me and that we were meant to be together. He was sweating and wild-eyed, clearly unstable. Andrew stepped between Tyler and me, protecting me while staying remarkably calm. He told Tyler he needed to leave immediately. Tyler got aggressive, saying Andrew didn't know me like he did and that I'd never be happy with anyone else. Andrew stood firm and said Tyler had 5 seconds to leave before he called the police. Some of Andrew's groomsmen came forward and physically escorted Tyler out of the venue. Tyler was screaming the whole way, saying this wasn't over and that I'd regret choosing Andrew. One of my bridesmaids had already called 911, and the police arrived within minutes. Tyler was arrested on the spot for trespassing and violating the spirit of the expired restraining order. The ceremony continued after Tyler was removed, but the mood had completely shifted. I was shaking and crying, not from happiness, but from fear and humiliation. My guests were whispering and looking concerned. What should have been the most magical moment of my life had been tainted by my toxic ex making a scene. Andrew held my hands and told me we didn't have to continue if I wasn't up to it, but I was determined not to let Tyler ruin this day completely. We went forward with the vows, though I was rattled and distracted. When we finally kissed as husband and wife, I felt relief more than joy. Relief that we'd gotten through it. Relief that Tyler was gone. The reception was better, but the shadow of what had happened hung over everything. Guests kept asking if I was okay. My parents were upset and worried. Andrew's family was stunned that something so dramatic had happened. Instead of celebrating our marriage, we spent half the reception dealing with the aftermath of Tyler's intrusion. I found out later how Tyler had known about the wedding. He'd been monitoring my social media through fake accounts and had seen posts from my bridal shower and bachelorette party. He'd figured out the venue and date from context clues and photos. He'd been planning to crash the wedding for weeks, building up the delusion that he could win me back with some grand romantic gesture. There was nothing romantic about what Tyler did. It was possessive, entitled, and terrifying. He believed he had some claim on me even years after our relationship ended and after I'd gotten a restraining order against him. He couldn't accept that I'd moved on and was happy with someone else. His love was really just a desire to control me. Tyler was charged with criminal trespass and harassment. Given his history with the restraining order, the prosecutor took the case seriously. He ended up pleading guilty and was sentenced to probation and mandatory counseling. A new restraining order was put in place, this one lasting longer and with stricter terms. The wedding video is hard to watch. You can see the exact moment my expression changes from happiness to horror when I notice Tyler. You can hear the gasps from guests. You can see Andrew shielding me and the groomsmen rushing forward. It's all captured, a permanent record of my ex trying to ruin the most important day of my life. Andrew has been amazing through all of this. He's never blamed me for Tyler's behavior or made me feel like it was somehow my fault for having a crazy ex. He's been supportive while I've worked through the trauma of having Tyler reappear so dramatically. He's helped me feel safe and reminded me that Tyler doesn't have power over my life anymore. I'm still healing from what happened. I have nightmares sometimes about Tyler showing up at other important events, the birth of our future children, holidays, random moments of happiness. I've increased my security precautions and am more careful about what I post on social media. The hypervigilance is exhausting, but feels necessary. What Tyler did wasn't about love. It was about control and entitlement. He believed he had the right to disrupt my wedding because he couldn't accept that I'd moved on. He was willing to humiliate me in front of everyone I loved to make a point about his own feelings. That's not romance, it's obsession. If you have an ex who showed concerning behavior after a breakup, please take it seriously. Get restraining orders if necessary. Be careful about what you share on social media. Tell your wedding vendors about the situation so they can be prepared. I never imagined Tyler would actually crash my wedding, and that naivety almost let him succeed in ruining it. My marriage to Andrew is strong despite the traumatic start. We've been married for 2 years now and are happy. Tyler is a ghost from my past who tried and failed to haunt my present. He doesn't define my story. Andrew does. That's the end of that story. Your ex-boyfriend stalked your social media for weeks, figured out the details of your wedding, and showed up. Uninvited to physically interrupt your ceremony and claim you belonged with him years after you'd needed a restraining order to get him to leave you alone. He turned what should have been the happiest moment of your life into a traumatic scene that's now captured forever on your wedding video, and he probably convinced himself he was being romantic when really he was being possessive, controlling, and unable to accept that you'd moved on. He didn't love you, he wanted to own you, and when he couldn't, he tried to destroy your happiness with someone else. At least Andrew handled it perfectly, and you got through the ceremony despite everything. Let's talk about someone whose mother-in-law made their married life miserable. My mother-in-law tried to break up my marriage because she thought I wasn't good enough for her son. From the day I met my husband's mother, she made it clear she didn't approve of me. Over 8 years of marriage, she's tried countless schemes to break us up, from spreading lies, to manufacturing conflicts, to trying to set my husband up with other women. The battle to keep my marriage intact while dealing with her toxicity has been one of the hardest things I've ever done. I met my husband Jason at a mutual friends party when we were both 25. We hit it off immediately and started dating. He told me early on that his mother, Patricia, was difficult and that their relationship was complicated. I thought I could handle it. I'm generally good with people and figured I could win her over. I had no idea what I was getting into. The first time I met Patricia, she looked me up and down and asked Jason if he was sure about this one. She questioned me about my job, my family background, my education, all with a barely concealed sneer. She made comments about my appearance that were technically compliments, but felt like criticisms. You're pretty in an unusual way, and I suppose some men like that style. I left feeling unsettled, but told myself it was just nerves on both sides. As Jason and I got more serious, Patricia's opposition became more obvious. She'd make snide remarks about me to Jason when she thought I couldn't hear. She'd forget to invite me to family gatherings, then act surprised when Jason wouldn't come without me. She'd compare me unfavorably to Jason's ex-girlfriends, talking about how classy and accomplished they were. She seemed determined to undermine me at every turn. When Jason proposed after 2 years of dating, Patricia cried, and not happy tears. She told Jason he was making a mistake, that he was too young to get married, that he didn't really know me. She begged him to at least wait a few more years. When Jason refused, she blamed me, saying I'd clearly pressured him into proposing before he was ready. The wedding planning was a nightmare. Patricia tried to take over every decision, insisting that as the mother of the groom, she had certain rights. She wanted to choose the venue, the menu, the flowers, all things that were completely different from what I wanted. When I pushed back, she'd go to Jason and cry about how I was excluding her and disrespecting her. Jason was caught in the middle, and it caused significant tension between us. On the wedding day itself, Patricia wore white, not off-white, not cream a white dress that looked almost bridal. When people gave her confused looks, she acted innocent and said she hadn't realized it would be a problem. She positioned herself prominently in photos and found ways to insert herself into moments that should have been just for Jason and me. Looking at our wedding album, she's in the background of almost every shot. After the wedding, Patricia's tactics evolved. She started spreading lies about me to extended family members. She told people I was controlling and didn't let Jason see his friends or family. She said I was bad with money and was spending all of Jason's income. She implied that I'd trapped Jason by getting pregnant before the wedding, which wasn't even true. We didn't have our first child until 3 years after we got married. The lies got back to me through sympathetic relatives who thought I should know what Patricia was saying. When I confronted her, she denied everything and accused me of turning Jason's family against her. She cried and said she was just a mother who loved her son and was being persecuted for it. Jason believed me over her, but the constant drama was exhausting. Patricia's most disturbing tactic was trying to set Jason up with other women. She'd invite him to family events and conveniently seat him next to single women she described as old family friends. She'd mention attractive co-workers of hers who were just his type. She even reached out to one of Jason's ex-girlfriends and tried to arrange a meeting, telling her that Jason was unhappy in his marriage and might be open to reconnecting. The ex-girlfriend, to her credit, told Jason about the conversation, and he was furious. Through all of this, Jason has stood by me. He's confronted his mother repeatedly, set boundaries, and made clear that if she can't respect his marriage, she won't be part of his life. Patricia always promises to do better, behaves for a few months, then reverts to her old patterns. It's a never-ending cycle. When we had our first child, I hoped that becoming a grandmother might soften Patricia. Instead, it gave her new ammunition. She criticized my parenting constantly. She'd undermine my rules when she babysat. She told our daughter that I was too strict, and that Grandma's house was where she could do whatever she wanted. She tried to create a wedge between me and my own child. I finally put my foot down and significantly limited Patricia's time with our daughter. Patricia exploded, calling me a monster who was keeping her from her grandchild. She sent Jason guilt-tripping messages about how she might die without really knowing her grandchildren. She told extended family that I was using the children as pawns to punish her. The family was divided, with some people siding with her and others understanding why I'd set boundaries. The breaking point came about 2 years ago. I found out that Patricia had been telling our daughter, who was 5 at the time, that Daddy would be happier with a different mommy. She'd been showing our daughter pictures of Jason's ex-girlfriends and saying they could have been her real mommy. Our daughter came home confused and asked me if Daddy was going to get a new mommy. I was devastated and furious. Patricia had crossed every line imaginable, but trying to manipulate a 5-year-old to undermine my marriage was too far. Jason confronted his mother and told her she was no longer welcome in our home or around our children until she got serious help and demonstrated genuine change. Patricia refused to acknowledge she'd done anything wrong. She said our daughter had misunderstood, that she'd been showing old family photos, and the child had gotten confused. She said I was overreacting and using this as an excuse to cut her out. She showed no remorse and no understanding of how damaging her behavior was. It's been 2 years since we went no contact with Patricia. She still sends cards and gifts for birthdays and holidays, which we donate unopened. She still reaches out to Jason periodically, testing whether he'll let her back in. She's told extended family that I've brainwashed Jason and kidnapped her grandchildren. Some relatives have stopped talking to us. Others have quietly admitted they understand why we made this choice. My marriage is stronger now than it's ever been. Without Patricia constantly trying to drive wedges between us, Jason and I have been able to focus on our relationship and our children. The stress of dealing with her toxicity was affecting us more than we'd realized until it was gone. Going no contact was hard, but it was absolutely the right decision. I know Patricia will never accept responsibility for her actions. In her mind, she's a devoted mother who lost her son to a manipulative woman. She can't see that her own behavior pushed Jason away, that her attempts to destroy our marriage backfired spectacularly. She'll probably die believing she was the victim, and I've made peace with that. What I want other people in similar situations to know is that you don't have to tolerate toxic in-laws just because they're family. You can set boundaries. You can limit contact. You can go no contact if necessary. Your marriage and your mental health are more important than maintaining a relationship with someone who's actively trying to destroy your family. Jason's loyalty through all of this has meant everything. He chose me over his mother, repeatedly and unequivocally. Not every spouse in this situation does that, and I'm grateful that he saw his mother clearly and refused to let her manipulation succeed. Together, we've built a life that Patricia tried to prevent, and that's the best revenge possible. That's the end of that story. Your mother-in-law spent 8 years trying to destroy your marriage through lies, manipulation, and even attempting to set your husband up with other women. She wore white to your wedding, spread rumors to extended family, and when she became a grandmother, she tried to turn your 5-year-old against you by showing her pictures of your husband's ex-girlfriends and saying they could have been her real mommy. The fact that she could manipulate a child to undermine your marriage shows there's no line she won't cross. At least Jason saw through her and chose your marriage over his mother's toxicity. Going no contact was absolutely the right call. You can't maintain a relationship with someone who's actively working to destroy your family. Our next story is about workplace betrayal that cost someone their career advancement. My coworker stole my project and got the promotion that should have been mine. I spent 6 months developing a project that was going to secure my promotion. Then my coworker, who I thought was my friend, stole the entire thing and presented it as her own work. She got my promotion, and when I tried to prove what happened, nobody believed me because she'd been so thorough in covering her tracks. I worked at a tech company in product development. I'd been there for 4 years and was ready for a promotion to senior product manager. My boss told me that if I could successfully lead a major initiative, the promotion would be mine. I was motivated and ready to prove myself. I developed a proposal for a new product feature that I believed could significantly increase user engagement and revenue. I spent months researching, gathering data, creating presentations, and building prototypes. I worked nights and weekends. I poured everything I had into this project because I knew it was my ticket to advancement. My coworker Heather sat near me, and we'd become work friends over the years. We'd get lunch together, complain about office politics, and share details about our lives. I trusted her completely and would often bounce ideas off her about my project. I showed her early drafts of my presentations and asked for her feedback. I shared my research and data with her. I had no idea she was taking notes for a very different purpose. About 3 weeks before I was scheduled to present my project to leadership, Heather asked for a meeting with our boss. I didn't think anything of it. People met with our boss all the time. But then I heard through the grapevine that Heather had presented a major project proposal that had impressed everyone. When I asked her about it, she was vague and changed the subject. 2 days later, my boss called me into his office. He said there was a problem. Heather had presented a project that was almost identical to mine. He said he wasn't sure what had happened, but it looked like either we'd been working on the same idea independently, or one of us had copied the other. He asked me to explain. I was blindsided. I told my boss that I'd been developing this project for 6 months, that I had documentation showing my work, and that Heather must have stolen it from me. He seemed skeptical and said Heather had shown him extensive documentation as well. He said he'd need to investigate before my presentation could go forward. The investigation was a joke. Heather had been incredibly thorough in covering her tracks. She'd backdated documents to make it look like she'd been working on the project as long as I had. She'd created fake email trails by sending messages to herself and altering the timestamps. She'd even enlisted a friend in another department to claim he'd seen her working on the project months earlier. I had documentation too, but mine looked less organized because I hadn't been planning to defend myself against theft. I'd just been working. My early drafts had dates, but they could be disputed. The people I'd mentioned the project to in passing couldn't remember exactly when our conversations had happened. It was my word against Heather's fabricated evidence. My boss ultimately concluded that he couldn't determine who had originated the idea and that both of us would be allowed to present our versions to leadership. But by then, Heather had already poisoned the well. She'd been subtly suggesting to leadership that I was jealous of her success and was trying to claim credit for work she'd done. By the time I presented, people were looking at me with suspicion rather than enthusiasm. Heather's presentation went first. She was polished and confident, presenting my ideas as if she'd developed them herself. She used my research, my data, my strategies. I sat in that meeting, watching someone else take credit for 6 months of my work, and there was nothing I could do about it. When I presented 2 days later, the reception was cool. People asked pointed questions that suggested they doubted I'd done the work. Someone even asked if I could prove the ideas were mine, which is almost impossible when someone has stolen your work and fabricated evidence claiming it as their own. Heather got the promotion. She got my promotion for my work. She stood at the company all-hands meeting, being celebrated while I sat in the audience, knowing I'd been robbed. The injustice of it was overwhelming. I tried one more time to make my case, going directly to HR with everything I had. I showed them my work files with metadata showing creation dates. I explained how Heather had access to all my materials because I'd trusted her. I pointed out inconsistencies in her documentation, but HR said that without definitive proof of misconduct, they couldn't take action. They suggested I move forward and focus on future opportunities. I couldn't stay at that company. Every day I had to see Heather in her new role, being praised for innovations that came from my mind. Every day I had to pretend everything was fine when I was burning. with anger and humiliation. Every day, I was reminded that I'd been naive enough to trust someone who'd betrayed me completely. I found a new job within a few months and left. I heard later that Heather's performance in the senior role was mediocre because, surprise, she couldn't generate new ideas on her own. She'd just been good at stealing mine. She eventually left the company too, but not before getting the salary increase and title bump that should have been mine. The experience fundamentally changed how I operate at work. I no longer share ideas freely with coworkers. I document everything obsessively, keeping detailed records with timestamps and witnesses. I'm careful about who I trust and what information I reveal. It's exhausting, and it makes work less collaborative and enjoyable, but I'll never put myself in a position to be stolen from like that again. What Heather did wasn't just career theft, it was a betrayal of friendship. We'd been close, or so I thought. I'd shared personal things with her, invited her to events outside work, considered her a genuine friend, and the whole time, she was just waiting for an opportunity to take something from me. That realization hurt almost as much as losing the promotion. I've never gotten a real apology or acknowledgement from Heather. She ran into a former colleague of mine at a conference once, and apparently acted like nothing had happened, asking how I was doing with fake concern. She's either convinced herself she did nothing wrong, or she's so sociopathic that she doesn't care. Either way, she's someone I hope I never see again. The lesson I learned is that the workplace isn't fair, and that protecting yourself is essential. Don't share work in progress with people who could be your competition. Keep detailed records that prove when you did things. Be aware that even friends can become enemies when promotions and money are involved. It's a cynical worldview, but it's one that would have saved me from losing 6 months of work and a career advancement I'd earned. That's the end of that story. Your work friend stole the project you'd spent 6 months developing, created fake documentation to make it look like it was her idea, got the promotion you deserved, and faced zero consequences because she'd been so thorough in covering her tracks. You trusted her with your ideas and research, and she used that trust to take everything you'd worked for. The company's response was basically, "We can't tell who's lying, so we'll do nothing," which rewarded her for being better at deception than you were at defending yourself, and she's probably out there somewhere, doing the same thing to someone else. You learned an expensive lesson about workplace trust, but at least you'll never be vulnerable again. Our final story for this part is about what happens when family and business mix badly. My parents gave my brother the family business, and expected me to still work there for nothing. I spent 15 years building my parents' business alongside my brother, thinking we'd inherit it equally. Then my parents announced they were giving the entire business to my brother, and expected me to continue working there as his employee. When I refused and left, they acted like I was the one who'd betrayed the family. My parents started a restaurant when I was 10 years old. Growing up, my brother Michael and I both worked there, bussing tables, washing dishes, eventually cooking and managing. We didn't get paid like regular employees. We got small allowances, and were told our compensation was that we'd inherit the business someday. "This is your legacy," my parents would say. "Everything we're building is for you two." I took that seriously. I went to culinary school specifically to bring skills back to the family restaurant. I turned down job offers at other establishments because I was committed to our family business. I worked 60-hour weeks for years, helping expand from 1 location to 3. I sacrificed my 20s and early 30s for what I thought was my future. Michael also worked hard, but he was never as invested as I was. He'd take time off to travel, pursue other interests, and generally treat the restaurant as one part of his life rather than his whole life. My parents didn't seem to hold this against him. They'd just ask me to cover his shifts and responsibilities, which I always did. When my parents turned 65, they decided to retire. They called a family meeting to discuss the succession plan. I went in expecting them to announce that Michael and I would take over as equal partners. Instead, they announced they were giving the entire business to Michael, and I could continue working there as a manager under him. I was stunned. I asked why Michael was getting everything when we'd both worked there our whole lives. My parents said Michael was the oldest, and it was tradition for the oldest son to inherit the family business. They said they knew I'd understand because I loved the restaurant and would want to see it continue successfully under family leadership. I pointed out that I'd worked significantly more than Michael over the years. I'd sacrificed relationships, hobbies, and opportunities because I was so dedicated to the business. I'd literally gone to culinary school for this restaurant. How was it fair that he got everything and I got nothing? My mother said I was being selfish and materialistic. She said family businesses weren't about fairness. They were about tradition and keeping the legacy intact. She said if I really loved the family and the restaurant, I wouldn't care about technicalities, like ownership. I should just be happy to continue being part of something my parents built. My father said he'd expected better from me. He said I was showing my true colors by caring more about money than family. He said Michael needed the business more than I did, because he had a family to support, never mind that I also had bills to pay and a life to fund. He said if I wanted to throw away my relationship with the family over this, that was my choice. Michael, to his credit, seemed uncomfortable with the situation. He said he'd always assumed we'd run the business together, and was surprised by our parents' decision too. But he didn't refuse the gift, or offer to split it with me. He accepted ownership of the business I'd helped build for 15 years, and expressed hope that I'd stay on and help him run it. I said no. I told my family that I'd given 15 years of my life to that business, on the understanding that it would be partly mine. I wasn't going to spend the next 15 years building it further, just to make Michael wealthy, while I earned a manager's salary. If they didn't value my contributions enough to give me any ownership, I didn't value the business enough to continue sacrificing for it. My parents were furious. They called me ungrateful, disloyal, and selfish. They said I was abandoning the family legacy over pride. They said if I walked away, I was dead to them. They actually said that dead to them over me refusing to work for my brother for free after being cut out of my inheritance. I walked away. I took a job at another restaurant, one that actually paid me fairly for my skills and experience. It was hard starting over in my mid-30s when I'd planned to already have ownership stake in a successful business. But it was better than being exploited by my own family. My relationship with my parents is essentially over. They make occasional contact, usually to guilt me about not being part of the family business, or to ask if I've come to my senses. They've never apologized for cutting me out, or acknowledged that what they did was unfair. In their minds, I'm the one who broke up the family by refusing to accept their decision. My relationship with Michael is complicated. He didn't make the decision to cut me out, but he benefited from it and didn't fight for me. He could have refused the gift unless it was split between us. He could have offered me a partnership stake from his own portion. Instead, he took everything and hoped I'd just keep working as his employee. That's not something I can fully forgive. The restaurant is struggling now, ironically. Without me, they're handling the operations I'd always handled. Things have fallen apart somewhat. Michael doesn't have the same dedication or skill set. The last time I heard, they'd had to close one of the 3 locations. Part of me feels vindicated by this. Part of me just feels sad about what could have been. The experience taught me that family businesses can be traps. The promise of future ownership keeps you working for below-market wages, sacrificing your own interests for the family. But that promise can be broken at any time, and if you have no legal claim to the business, you have no recourse. All those years of sacrifice become worthless the moment your family decides to cut you out. I now have a clear policy. I work for fair wages with everything in writing. I don't sacrifice for promises of future compensation. I don't let family guilt me into working for less than I'm worth. These boundaries exist specifically because my own parents exploited me for 15 years and then discarded me when it was convenient. If you're working in a family business with promises of future ownership, please protect yourself. Get things in writing. Make sure your contributions are legally recognized. Don't sacrifice your earning years for a promise that can be broken. My family taught me that lesson the hard way. I hope others can learn from my experience without going through it themselves. That's the end of that story. You spent 15 years building your parents' business, turned down other opportunities, went to culinary school specifically for the family restaurant, and worked 60-hour weeks, all because you were told you'd inherit the business alongside your brother. Then, your parents gave everything to your brother because of tradition, and expected you to keep working there as his employee. When you refused to continue being exploited, they called you selfish and said you were dead to them. They took 15 years of your labor under false pretenses and then acted like you were the betrayer when you wouldn't give them 15 more years for nothing. The restaurant struggling without you is poetic justice, but it doesn't give you back the decades you spent building something you never got to own. And those are the first set of stories for tonight. We've covered some heavy topics: betrayal by sisters, siblings trying to steal inheritances, secret recordings, workplace bullying, family secrets, and so much more. These are the kinds of stories that remind us that sometimes the people closest to us are capable of the worst hurt. But hopefully, hearing about other people's struggles has helped ease your own thoughts a bit. Sometimes knowing you're not alone in dealing with difficult people and situations makes makes your own problems feel a little lighter. Take a breath, stay comfortable, and when you're ready, there's more to come. More stories about entitled people, family drama, and the complicated relationships that make life so challenging. Rest easy, and I'll see you in the next part. Surprised when Jason wouldn't come without me,